Just welcome everyone to Unchained Capital's webinar series. This is exclusive for Unchained Capital clients to ensure that you guys are getting that continuing education and just hands-on support. Today, it is myself, Justine Harper. I'm the VP of Concierge, along with Phil Geiger, Managing Director of Concierge, and we're going to be covering quarterly key checks and firmware updates for your hardware devices. So with that being said, just want to let everyone know you guys can ask questions in the Q&A section or in the chat. I'll be following those and pulling relevant ones, and then we'll have open Q&A at the end too. So feel free to ask any general questions as well. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Phil Geiger, who's going to lead this webinar.
All right, thanks Justine, and welcome everyone to our continuing education webinar series. Today we're going to talk about a couple subjects that we get a lot of questions about, and so we thought it would be good to just hop on a webinar and go through everything. Quarterly key checks and firmware updates. As Justine mentioned, I'm Phil Geiger. I'm the Managing Director of our Concierge program, and I'll be leading the kind of demo and presentation this morning, and Justine's going to be helping out with any questions that you guys have, so feel free to drop them in the chat. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to do an introduction, as we usually do, a review of key terms. So we find that it's just good to kind of reinforce that knowledge that you might have learned during your concierge onboarding or as you've kind of gotten more experience with playing around with the vaults. Then we'll go through and I'll do a demo of our quarterly key checks, as well as talk through some of the philosophy as to why we actually have them in the first place. And then finally, we're going to do kind of a blitzkrieg of updating the firmware for the 3 most common hardware wallets that our clients use. So we're going to update the firmware on a Trezor Model T, a Ledger S. The Nano X is essentially the exact same process of updating the firmware. So the S and X are basically the same process. And then we'll do a COLDCARD if we have time. The COLDCARD's a little bit different, so I think we'll probably be able to get through all 3, but want to make sure that we cover for sure the Model T and the Ledger X. All right. With that, let's start with our kind of review of key terms. So the first term to talk about is a Bitcoin address. This is where your Bitcoin live. And an address looks like a series of kind of alphanumeric digits, and it's tracked, like all the Bitcoin is tracked and stored on the blockchain, which is a database of all of the Bitcoin addresses and balances. What's kind of fascinating about the Bitcoin blockchain is that after 12 years of transactions, the entire database is only 350 gigabytes, which is getting to the point where you can almost run the entire blockchain or a full node on your phone. So I think we'll catch up to kind of phone technology in a few years, but I think soon everybody's going to have the entire blockchain just be able to walk around. And the reason that that's so important is that because it's so lightweight, it allows people to make sure that the supply of 21 million Bitcoin is never compromised. So you can always verify and you can always look up every transaction that has ever happened. Bitcoin addresses can be constructed from one key or can be constructed from many keys, but every single Bitcoin address that exists is constructed from keys. And then, as you can see on the right side, everyone in the world can see Bitcoin addresses and see the balances, but only the person who has the keys to the address has the ability to move Bitcoin around. And this is a view of blockstream.info, which allows you to search for specific transactions or specific addresses, and you can just look it up on that website. So if you have a Bitcoin address in a wallet, a single signature wallet, you could go and look it up at blockstream.info and it should tell you the exact same thing. Bitcoin addresses are built from public keys. I think of a public key as kind of a lock, right? If a private key, which is what lives on your device, is a key, the public key is the corresponding lock that it shares to build an address. So all the hardware wallets that you might use today, Trezor, COLDCARD, Ledger, and a few others, share public keys with wallet software like Unchained or Trezor.io or Ledger Live to help you build addresses. Your address doesn't live on the device. The key to the address lives on the device. So each public key that is used to construct a Bitcoin address has a corresponding individual private key. So every address has at least one public key that was used to construct it and at least one private key corresponding to it. The hardware wallets or the devices know how to use the private keys to sign and spend transactions. that are living in an address or Bitcoin addresses. Now, taking a step back, there's this concept of an Xpub, or an extended public key. So if a public key is a single lock, an Xpub is a master lock. You share a master lock with wallet software, and you can build a series of Bitcoin addresses. An Xpub can be derived down to an individual, nearly infinite individual public keys, and individual public keys are packaged together in addresses. So when I think of a wallet, a Bitcoin wallet, those are constructed from Xpubs. Addresses constructed from public keys, wallets constructed from Xpubs. And the master key here is the seed. So the seed is the 24 or 12 list set of words that your device generates. It's your master key, and it's from which everything else is derived. So your seed is always the most important thing that you're protecting, because it is the master key that can create the extended public keys, that can create the public keys, that can create the addresses. So the seed is kind of the root. It's a seed from above which everything can kind of grow or branch out. At Unchained, we recommend always securing your seed physically. Again, the seed is the master key, and you always want that physical, because these hardware wallets, they're good, but they're not going to last for 10 or 15 years. They're kind of pieces of technology. We should assume that eventually something about them is going to fail. And if you have your seed physically, not a problem. You can take your seed and load it onto another device. Now, multi-sig is great because we have two seeds. So now each seed alone isn't a single point of failure. If one of your 24 word lists is compromised, it doesn't mean that the person who has your seed has your Bitcoin, because in multi-sig, you need one additional piece of information, which we call the wallet configuration file. When you set up your vault with us, you want to download your wallet configuration file. And this is the thing that protects you or eliminates Unchained capital as a single point of failure from your Bitcoin. I think of the wallet configuration file as the treasure map, or the directions to your multi-sig addresses. Normally, when you're logging into your Unchained account, we are coordinating this information for you. But if Unchained doesn't exist anymore, if it disappears, how do you find your multi-sig Bitcoin? With your wallet configuration file. It contains all of the extended public keys, and it contains the directions from your seed to the individual corresponding kind of private and public keys. And now where you want to store this file is, we think it's okay to store it encrypted and digitally. So somewhere in like a password manager as an attachment, it's a good place for that. And the reason that you can do that is because with the file, somebody only has directions to your addresses. They don't have the ability to spend from your addresses. They need two keys. With just the keys, they don't necessarily know where your Bitcoin live. It's like picking a key up off the ground. So it's really the combination of two items that help keep you much more secure with multi-sig. All right, I'm going to pause there and just see if there's any questions about the key terms, and then we'll dive right into our quarterly key checks demo.
I don't see any questions as of now, but if you guys do have any, or if something does not make sense, make sure you're dropping it in chat or the Q&A section, and then we can review those. And so I just saw one come in from Garrett here. So is a seed usable cross company? If my two seeds are from Trezor keys and Trezor disappears, can I back that up from another key company like COLDCARD?
Absolutely. So yeah, that is a fantastic question. And the seeds they follow a standard, and it's called BIP39. So there's 2,048 words in this kind of library, and the device knows how to generate the key and kind of map that to the list of words. So the seed itself is compatible with any hardware wallet that is worth using. There's actually a few hardware wallets that don't follow the BIP39 standard, and you should not use those because if you don't have the seed, you're placing a lot more trust in these, pieces of technology, then you need to. So yeah, you always want to have physical seeds, and they should be following the BIP39 mnemonic. So yes, you can generate a seed from a ledger, you can load that seed onto a cold card. You can generate a seed from a Trezor, you can put it onto a ledger, and vice versa. A lot of our clients will also, so you'll maybe generate 2 seeds from 2 different manufacturers, and then have some spare devices lying around. So if anything happens with any one of the devices, if a firmware update breaks compatibility or wipes the seed off the device, you can take that seed and load it onto another device.
Perfect.
All right.
That's all we have for now. So maybe we can move on to the next section, and I'll keep reviewing. And again, if you guys have any questions, concerns, or things don't make sense that Phil's saying, just go ahead and drop them in chat or the Q&A, and I will grab those and we can review them a little bit more.
And I see Jeff does his daily meditation as memorizing his seed. Just make sure that you're not saying it out loud, that you're keeping it in your head. Okay, up next, we're going to do a quarterly key check. So I've logged into my Unchained Capital account, and in the upper, this is my home dashboard. In the upper right-hand corner, I can see all my notifications. And in particular, I can see my quarterly key check. So I'm going to open up Hayek here. Now, what is a quarterly key check? A quarterly key check is a great opportunity for you once a quarter to connect your devices, make sure that you still hold the private key on the devices to the kind of corresponding extended public key that we know about. And it's a great opportunity as well to check your seeds and to make sure that your device firmware is up to date. So all of the hardware wallet manufacturers will periodically release device firmware updates. And the reason that they do this is to patch vulnerabilities, to improve user interface and just the functionality. And yeah, kind of the process of it is in the long term going to make Bitcoin significantly more user-friendly and more secure. So it should be embraced. But the problem with it is that sometimes the devices reduce compatibility. So when I tell people about like kind of firmware and quarterly key checks, it's like, don't always be the first person jumping off the cliff and updating your firmware, but it's generally good practice to stay up to date with device firmware. So I usually wait about 3 weeks or a month after a new firmware is released before I go and update my device. But the key check is really our way of kind of prompting you to think about your operational security. So there's no scenario in Bitcoin where you can just set it and forget it forever. Because if you're not periodically checking on your keys, you have no way of knowing if you've been compromised or not. So again, the quarterly key check is a great opportunity to just kind of run through all of these things and more. And here's exactly how to do the key check. So I was logged into my home dashboard. Again, I selected this notification up here, and you'll be getting emails from us as well. And when you log in, you'll see some notifications. I jumped into my key Hayek here. And now what I'm going to do is connect my Trezor. So Hayek lives on a Trezor 1 today. This key menu, it tells you a lot of information about the individual key. So it's going to tell you the last time it was checked, which was about a quarter ago, almost 90 days ago. It tells you the vaults and loans that the key is used. And then here is where if your key has been compromised or you lost it or it no longer functions, you can actually go through our replace key workflow. Now, you should really only do this if you have been compromised and you can't sign a transaction anymore. I think it's typically easier to just kind of build a new vault and move from one vault to another rather than doing the key replacement workflow. But this is a good time for you to do that, or this is where you would go to actually do that if you did have a totally lost or totally compromised key. To do the key check, all you do is select check now. You'll select the device that you have connected. So I'm doing, again, a Trezor 1. If I was doing a Ledger, I would unlock my device, open up the Bitcoin app. If I was doing a COLDCARD, I would select COLDCARD and I would export my extended public key like I did when I created my vault. But for the Trezor, you'll just select Trezor and you select Connect Trezor. Now I'm taken to Trezor Connect, which is the kind of open source tool that Trezor published, the Trezor Bridge, and it allows the device to communicate with third parties. And Trezor Connect realizes, oh, hey, we're trying to share extended or public keys here, extended public keys. And it is okay to share extended public keys with wallet software that you trust. So Electrum or Trezor.io or Ledger Live or Unchained. If you trust the wallet software, it's okay to share a public key. Private keys never leave the device. The entire purpose of the device is to protect the private key. So I will share a public key, and since I'm using a Model 1, I enter the PIN here. If I was using a Model T, I would have already entered the PIN on my device. I'll hit confirm, and I've performed my key check. So what I've done here is I've essentially reset that timer, and then in about 75 days, I'll be reminded again to go through and check my key. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions about the quarterly key check.
Don't see any questions coming through at this time, but if we have one that comes through, I will let you know.
Awesome. The other thing that you can kind of do from this screen is you can always rename your key. So if you've chosen a key name and you've decided, oh, I don't like that name, you can rename it here. One thing to note is that if you do have different types of accounts with us, so if you have a personal account and a self-directed IRA, retirement account, and a business account or a family trust account, and you're using the same hardware wallet across those contexts, you will need to do a key check in every context. So I just performed a key check in my personal context. What I would do next is switch to my company context, and then I can run through and do those key checks here. So I'll do a key check for this key here. And it's the same process. Select check now, select Trezor, hit connect, run through these screens where you're giving it permission to share a public key. And now my key is functional again. Let's talk about what happens if you don't do a key check. So ultimately, nothing happens to your Bitcoin that's currently in your Bitcoin address. What we do on our side is we say, well, we're not sure that our client actually holds this key anymore. So what we won't let you do is build new vault addresses or loan addresses with that key until it's checked. So you still have full control of your Bitcoin as long as you have the key, and you would be able to recover your funds with Caravan, no problem. And as soon as you log in and do that key check, the key on our platform is back to having full functionality. So again, if you don't do a key check, you're going to get a lot of emails from us, but it doesn't mean that you've lost your Bitcoin or anything.
Perfect. There was a question just about key checks having to do with COLDCARD devices specifically. And while you may have saved the Xpub on the micro SD, assuming it is best practice to always regenerate the Xpub during the key check process. Maybe you could kind of go into maybe what that looks like a little bit more.
That's correct. So for those who haven't used a COLDCARD, this is what a COLDCARD looks like. And you never connect a COLDCARD, or you never have to connect a COLDCARD to a computer. And so the way that you do your key check is by generating a little file on an SD card, plugging that SD card into your computer, and then uploading that file. And to that question, best practice with your COLDCARD SD card is to always keep it clean after you're done using it. So once you've used it to upload your extended public keys initially to build your vault, and you've installed your COLDCARD wallet file on your device, then wipe the SD card. And then yes, during your quarterly key checks, generate the extended public key again and upload it, and then clean up the SD card. That's a great question.
That's a great question. And I think last time we did do a vault review. I think you actually did show the process of doing that on a COLDCARD. So if somebody's interested in looking at actually visualizing what that looks like before doing so, there is a video on our YouTube channel, and it's split up into sections where Phil actually walks through that step by step. The only other question I see here is from Jeff, and can this Trezor Model T also be used for other wallets in different contexts, or is this for Unchained Capital? It's more of a general question, so probably want to save that to the end. But yeah, the key check itself is having to do with our site specifically, but Phil could maybe jump into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we have plenty of time right now, so I'll just go ahead and answer that question. So yes, these devices can be used to build as many wallets as you would like, single signature wallets, multi-signature wallets, and so on, using all different tools. So you can use your Trezor with Electrum, with Sparrow Wallet, with Spectre Wallet, with Unchained Capital, with Trezor.io, with Trezor Vault, I think is their new platform, I don't remember, Trezor Suite is what it's called. You can use your hardware wallets across many, many different contexts. And that's not just Trezor specific, it's for all of them. The Ledger is the same thing. You can use your Ledger with Ledger Live, with other pieces of software. What's kind of amazing about Bitcoin is that this is a way to stay a little bit more trust minimized, right? So if something happens with Unchained, for example, you can still use your Trezor to recover your Unchained vault with Caravan or with Electrum or with some of the other tools that are out there. And that's because we're all kind of following the emerging Bitcoin standards and we're Bitcoin native. We want to be as close to kind of the Bitcoin protocol as possible. All right. Let's move on. So we just performed, we did an introduction and a review of key terms. We performed our quarterly key check, and now it's time to update the firmware. So during the quarterly key checks, what you might notice is that there's a little, especially for the Trezor, it'll have a little yellow kind of box in the upper left-hand corner of Trezor Connect that'll say, new firmware version is available. So what do you do when there's a new firmware version available? Let's start with the Trezor, and I will do a Trezor Model T firmware update. So I think the easiest way to update your firmware is to go to wallet.trezor.io and connect your device. First of all, maybe before I update the firmware, let's talk about what the firmware is. Firmware is software that lives on these devices that like tells the device how to deal with Bitcoin keys and different Bitcoin functionality. So it's the code that these little devices run. And again, the manufacturers will be updating the firmware periodically. It's typically like, once every couple months. And the reason they do that is because they add new functionality, they patch vulnerabilities, they improve functionality or usability of the device. It's really a good process to stay relatively up to date with the firmware. Again, you don't have to do it the first day that the firmware comes out. I actually recommend waiting 3 weeks to 1 month, but generally stay up to date with your firmware updates because your devices are just going to get better. When you connect your wallet, your Trezor to wallet.trezor.io, if there is a new firmware update, you'll see that up here at the top. So what I'll do is I'll hit show details. And this is kind of a little quirk of the Trezor Model T and the Model 1, to be honest. You have to kind of unplug it and you'll have to perform a step as you're plugging it back in. So it's a little bit like, patting your stomach and like rubbing your head. But what you'll do is you'll disconnect the device. Then for the Model T, you'll put your thumb on the screen and just kind of rub it like a Buddha belly, like you're rubbing your Buddha belly. If you have like one of those little Buddha statues. And when you connect it, it will be loaded. It'll be connected in bootloader mode. So that means that you've done it correctly. If it just boots up normally, it means that maybe your thumb came off the screen. Now for the Model 1, you're actually just holding down the two little buttons as you're connecting it. But once it's connected or booted up in bootloader mode, I'll hit that green check there. And I'm prompted on wallet.trezor.io to update the firmware. So you'll notice that Trezor always asks, prompts you with, I have my recovery seed with me. Almost all the manufacturers do that. Ledger does it as well. Again, the reason you always want to have your seed is that when you're going through this process, 99 out of 100 times it works no problem. But historically, there have been a few firmware updates that actually wipe the seed off of your device. If you have a physical seed, not a problem. Update the firmware, load your seed back on the device, or say, I'm too afraid of using that device, load it onto a different manufacturer. If you don't have the seed, then you have to go through and actually do a transaction and recreate all your wallets and stuff like that. It's really, really important to have the seed. So if you've confirmed that you have your seed, then you can go ahead and select update to version 2.4. Show the device here. So it's going to prompt me and say, hey, are you sure you want to update? And I will give it that green check. And then my device will start installing the firmware. Any questions about the Trezor firmware update as it's installing? Looks like it's taking just a little while.
there's a question about a little bit more asking about the seed phrases themselves. Since the firmware does take a couple minutes, this might be a good time since you were just discussing. So when you say actually load your seed back on the device, is that literally typing into the device, or would that have a web interface? So each device treats this scenario a little bit different, but maybe discuss on the Model T what that looks like.
Yeah, so the Model T, if your seed is wiped, the next time you plug it in, wallet.trezor.io will think it's a brand new device, and it'll say either create a wallet or recover wallet. What you would do is you would select recover wallet, and then you would grab your seed, and it would say, start entering word number 1, and after like the first 3 or 4 digits, it'll guess the word, and then you can kind of keep kind of going through all 12 or all 24 of them. All right, so my firmware's been updated, and now I'm entering my PIN again. And I'm brought back to my wallet. So my wallet now, my device firmware is totally up to date, and I can, if I want to, I can go back to Unchained and do another key check just to ensure, or check my multi-sig address on my device. But that's it for updating the Trezor firmware. Okay, so looks like there's another question. Do I have any qualifiers with regards to the statement or recommendation of keeping the COLDCARD micro SD card clean after use? I thought the wallet config file could remain on the SD card as a backup. You can leave your wallet configuration file on the SD card if you would like. I typically recommend putting the wallet configuration file, store it encrypted and digitally, so in a password manager or encrypted cloud storage, because then you can access your wallet configuration file from any computer in the world. So if you're, if you have to bugger out and you're down in El Salvador at the beach, you can just go into an internet cafe, grab that file, pop it into Caravan, grab your Trezor, sign your transactions, and go about your day. If you have it on the SD card, it's just another physical item to protect. And SD cards are another piece of technology, and so it's something that eventually might fail. So you have to kind of manage that a little bit more closely. It's all just trade-offs. If you put it in encrypted cloud storage, you're trusting that that company is actually encrypting the thing that you're putting there. But again, I think that trade-off is okay for most people because the information that that file contains is just the directions to your multi-sig address. It doesn't contain the ability to spend the Bitcoin. Okay, so we've done a Trezor firmware update. Now I'm going to go through and do a Ledger firmware update. So I just disconnected my Trezor. I'll forget that. Let me come in here and boot up Ledger Live. So Ledger firmware updates are pretty close to the same process. So, I'm using the Ledger Nano S today. I will go ahead and plug it in. Actually, I'll just navigate to the manager first. So you always do your firmware updates from the Ledger manager, and it's going to ask you, hey, connect and unlock your device. So I will connect to my Ledger here, and this is the Nano S. So this is the one that has the buttons on the top. The X has the buttons on the front, but same exact process. So I'm entering my PIN. And now it's going to prompt me and say, hey, is it cool to allow the Ledger manager on my device? And so I'll say yes. And on the Ledger, in order to confirm something, you're pressing both buttons, right? You're not just pressing one. And then at the top of Ledger Live, it's going to tell you if there's a firmware update available. So same thing like with the Trezor. Once you have it connected and you're in the Ledger manager, now you'll just select update firmware. And then it usually gives you a change log, so you can read through that. And then again, Ledger is also asking you, I have my recovery phrase. So all the hardware wallet manufacturers today are going to check with you, hey, are you sure you know where your seed is? And that's, again, why you always want to have your seed, because sometimes these firmware updates don't go as expected. So if you have your seed, you can say, I have my recovery phrase, and hit continue. And then it's going to start downloading. On my device, it'll start listing that it's processing. And then I can see on my screen here that it's about halfway or a quarter way through now. Not the most exciting part of the demo, watching the screen load, but good to kind of move slow and just make sure that things aren't getting jiggled and no wires are being crossed or unplugged.
Actually, a really great question. One of the aspects of updating firmware that I've worked with clients is sometimes if you see an error come up on the screen, it could be that the cord has detached or it's not a good connection. So don't fear. Sometimes it just means unplugging, replugging, starting over. Something to be aware of. That's a well-known error.
Great point. Okay, so now that it's been downloaded, my Ledger is going to ask me to update the firmware. It's going to tell me the version, and then it's going to start showing me this identifier. Now, this identifier is just a good check. It's calculated on your computer and then again on your device, and it tells you that you're installing the right firmware, or at least the firmware that Ledger Live is telling you. Now, you might have a bad version of Ledger Live, in which case it would also be lying to you, but if you know you have a good version of Ledger Live, then this identifier is a nice check here. So you can just review that, and you'll tap through the different lines and just kind of give it a look. 9.2 looks good. There's the last line, and then once you've done that, you can hit both buttons to perform the update. Then on the Ledger, again, you'll enter the PIN. And the Ledger is going to start telling you, yep, installing firmware. Then you enter the PIN again. So you're entering the PIN quite a bit with the Ledgers. And after you're done installing the firmware, so when you're doing your firmware installation, what the Ledger does is it wipes all of the apps that you have on it. So you might have Bitcoin apps, or if you have any other altcoins, it would have those apps on it as well. So updating the firmware is going to remove those apps, and then at the end of the firmware update, you reinstall the apps. This is good too, because then if your app has been updated, you're getting the most recent update. So it's going to again ask me to allow the manager on the device. I'll give it approval, and it will load up. Now, of course, my Ledger only has Bitcoin on it, so we're going to wait for just the Bitcoin app to install, and then we'll move on. My device is also going to show me that it's loading here. All right, so that is updating the Ledger. Any questions about the Ledger updates?
Don't see any questions coming through specifically about that. We've got a couple from Susan and Jeff that we're going to save till the end, just so you guys know I do see those, and we're going to kind of hold off on those. But it sounds like you're explaining this firmware update quite clearly, so everybody's on board. Keep going.
Awesome. Not too difficult once you see it a couple times. It can be a little intimidating at first to try to go through it, but once you do it once or twice, it becomes pretty straightforward. It's just always before you're doing the update, good opportunity to check to make sure you have your seeds. You have your seeds? Great. Run through the update. If you don't have your seed, maybe pause. Okay, so the last update we're going to do is for the COLDCARD. And the COLDCARD is just, again, a little bit more complicated than some of the other devices, because you never have to connect your COLDCARD to your computer. So we support the air-gapped version of COLDCARD signing only, which requires, again, kind of downloading little files on an SD card. So what I'll do here is I'll connect my COLDCARD to a wall outlet or something like that. Don't want to connect it to the computer so that it never comes in contact with the internet. Then none of the other devices leak seeds to an internet connected device, but some people are concerned about even just having a cable connecting. Now, multi-sig in a lot of ways, I think, protects you from a cable connected device, because even if the device compromises the seed, with one seed, you haven't lost your Bitcoin. But some folks want that extra security of having a device that never comes in contact with the internet. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to enter my COLDCARD PIN. And the COLDCARD has kind of a prefix and suffix PIN. So after the first part of my PIN, it's going to show me some words that I've memorized. And then I can enter the second half of my PIN here. All right, so my cold card's getting booted up here, and I'm brought to my main cold card menu. Now, I have to actually download the firmware file from COLDCARD itself. So what I always do is go to coldcardwallet.com, pay really close attention to the URL here, and then I will grab under this docs button, it will have instructions to update the firmware. Now, the most current version of the firmware is always going to be listed at the top, and the file type is this little DFU file, so kind of a weird file type. All you need to do is select the file. It will download. You'll open up your downloads folder, and you will move your file onto, let me grab that. You'll move it onto the SD card. Just right click. For some reason, it's not letting me drag and drop today. There we go. So now I have dragged and dropped the file onto my SD card. You can see that here. And you can eject your SD card. Then I'm going to unplug the SD card from my computer. So this is what the micro SD card looks like, this little guy. I will plug it into the back of the cold card here. So on the back of the cold card, there's a little slot that you enter your SD card. Just kind of push it all the way in until you hear that click. Then on the cold card, I go down to the advanced menu. And then I'll go to upgrade. And then I'll select from SD. And then the cold card's going to say, hey, pick the file that you want to use. There's only one file if you've done a good job of keeping your SD card clean. So here's the file, and I will select that, and it'll go through and load it up. As you can see at the bottom, it's just going to take 30 seconds or something like that to actually load it. And then there's one more step that I usually like to do after I've loaded the new firmware onto the cold card. Looks like there's a question. Is there a way to check if that version is already on my cold card? The answer is yes. So when you plug in your cold card in the lower left-hand corner, it's going to tell you what version it's on. And then as well, if you go to the advanced menu, so after it's done loading, it's going to kind of go through and verify it, and then it's going to load it up. So there's the advanced menu where you can say show version, and then also bless firmware, which I'll do next. So my cold card is now going through and installing and upgrading. And verifying. And as you can see in the lower left corner, it's going to show you that version. Then I'll enter my PIN here again. So I'm just entering my suffix, getting that booted up. And once it loads up, I'm brought back to the main screen, and that light is going to change to a green again if everything went well. Now, to bless my firmware, or just to check to make sure that I've done it correctly, you go down to advanced. You can do upgrade, and then do bless firmware. So this just checks to make sure that the firmware is good. And if it gives you that green light, your firmware has been blessed by your device. All right. So that's updating the device firmware. And as I mentioned, kind of best practice with the cold card is after you're done updating the firmware, take the SD card out, connect it back to your computer, and delete the file. Just plug in my SD card back in. And open up the file, just kind of move it to trash. Just clear your trash. And I would also anything that's been downloaded, also probably a good idea to just clean up. You don't need that. And then just delete your trash. Okay, so we just updated the firmware for the Trezor Model T, the Ledger Nano S, and the COLDCARD. That is kind of all I have today for demos. So it looks like we have plenty of time for questions. And we are always happy to just kind of share this information with you again. If you do have questions or need someone to go through it for your first time, we're here to help as well.
Perfect. And we do have a few questions. I had one that came through email earlier. Susan had a question about just our overall opinion on what the most secure hardware key setup is. I thought this would be a good one for you to go into. So she's asking, is a COLDCARD with a Trezor or Ledger, 2 COLDCARDs, what is the optimum security setup when it comes to hardware devices, which is a very subjective question, but I thought you could give some good insight to that.
Sure, and I think the answer is it's kind of subjective. I would say today, none of the hardware wallets are a silver bullet. They all come with very significant trade-offs in security, usability, and functionality. And they also kind of generate seeds in different methods, and they sign transactions differently. So the COLDCARD gets a lot of, the COLDCARD probably is the most secure out of all the hardware wallets, but the COLDCARD also comes with significant trade-offs that you have to make. It is hands down the most difficult to use. It does require passing around SD cards and managing your SD card folder. It requires, keeping up to date with making sure that your COLDCARD understands the vault. And then it has the most limited memory out of all the devices. So you really have to manage the number of deposits that are going into your multi-signature vault or your Bitcoin wallet. The COLDCARD can't really sign more than about 20 with what are known as UTXOs at a time. And UTXOs are chunks of data that live at an address. So significant kind of probably the most secure because it never comes in contact with a computer, but it's definitely an advanced device. Now, we ship the Trezor Model T for our concierge onboarding for a pretty specific reason. And that is Trezor generates their seed through open source software that's been open source since about 2013. So it's been out in the public generating seeds for a very long time. So we have a good idea that it is generating good seeds. The device itself has good multi-sig functionality. So you can check your address on the hardware wallet. You can do that with a COLDCARD as well. And then finally, out of all of them, I would say that the Model T is the most user-friendly. It's the easiest to use. Now, is it the perfect device? No. Is the COLDCARD the perfect device? No. Is the Ledger the perfect device? No. They all come with trade-offs. So if you're worried about one specific manufacturer, what I will typically say is generate seeds using different methods. So maybe a Ledger seed and a COLDCARD seed. Once your seeds are generated, you can then load it onto the device that you enjoy using the most for multi-sig. Because again, multi-sig is so much more secure than single sig that it eliminates the device as a single point of failure. Even if the device is compromised for one of your seeds, it doesn't mean that you've lost Bitcoin. With single signature wallets, the device itself is a much more critical part of your security. And so I would say for a single signature wallet, spend the time to learn how to use a COLDCARD. It's the, maybe the most secure device out of the bunch. But for multi-sig, I say generate the seeds using whichever method you like, and then pick the device that you find to be the most user-friendly. For multi-sig today, Ledger, I would say it's a little bit further behind the other two manufacturers in terms of multi-sig functionality. It's missing some critical multi-sig tools that the other two devices have. So Ledger generates great seeds. It uses a secure chip to generate the seed, which is different than open source. But because they're lacking some of the multi-sig functionality, it's hard to recommend the Ledger today. That was a long-winded answer, but it's a good question.
I was a great answer. It was very informative. I think that's perfect. And I hope that answered Jeff's question as well, who was just asking kind of the same idea as the cold card, the greatest one that exists. There are kind of a few other questions as well. One from Jeff, and it's more of a big picture question. He says, the hardware device can have many vaults, all of which have one seed. So that's a great thing pertaining specifically to the Unchained product, right? About multiple vaults using the same keys. Perhaps maybe dig in a little bit more about how a device though can be used for multiple different functions, single signature and multi-signature, to really give that big picture.
Sure, and this is another kind of deeper question, but if we remember our review, seeds are really kind of the foundation of a Bitcoin wallet, right? And from a seed, you can generate an extended public key, which is used to build Bitcoin addresses, because from an extended public key, you derive public keys. Public keys are packaged into addresses. So seed, Xpub, public key, address. The seed can generate nearly infinite extended public keys. So if I open my vault, Poseidon's Bounty here, what I can see if I select this external spend menu, so this is where you would go just right above the transact button to grab that wallet configuration file that you can use in the event that Unchained is inaccessible for any reason. You can also see what it contains. If I hit show information, what this is going to show me is all of the extended public keys that were used to build my vault, as well as for my keys, this pathway. And I think of this pathway as the directions from the seed to this extended public key. Starting from a seed, I go to M450200/0 and I get this Xpub. Now, when you share an extended public key with a single signature wallet, you might go to a different location to grab that extended public key. So for a SegWit Mk3 address, you might be going to M49 or M84, but a different location. So one seed plus this kind of pathway gives you different Xpubs, which can be used for different types of vaults or addresses. Did I answer that question, or did I go kind of off the rails on that one?
You answered it. I think that was good. The other question, yeah, no, I think you did great. I think the other question here is from Anonymous here. Did you demonstrate a quarterly key check with a cold card? I know we don't have a ton of time left, but there are quite a few questions of how a cold card, how that would work. Do you have the capability to perhaps show that?
I do. Let me, so it's on my other cold card. I can just walk through this.
If not, we do have that video. Okay.
Let me log into my other account and then I'll walk through the steps on my device to actually kind of go through the quarterly key check. So to do a quarterly key check with your cold card, you're taking your SD card out, you're plugging it into your cold card device, which you've already kind of unlocked. Then you're going to your keys menu here. You're opening up your key that needs to be checked. Again, on Unchained, what you'll do is you'll select check now, then you'll select cold card. Now, on your cold card, what you can do is go to whoops, gotta go back here. You go to settings. So from the main menu, you'll log down to, scroll down to settings. You will go to multi-sig wallets. And I gotta grab my other cold card. There will be an option to export your extended public key. You save it as the file, and then you would take the SD card out, plug it in, and upload the file. So I built my multi-sig vault with my other cold card and my demo cold card today. So we can do maybe a follow-up video of performing the key check with the cold card, the whole process. But settings, multi-sig wallet, export Xpub, you'll enter 0, and then it'll spit out a file. You put it on your SD card, you plug the SD card into the computer, you hit upload, resets that timer.
Yeah, and the user interface will kind of guide you through the rest of that. And how I mentioned earlier, or what I'd mentioned earlier, is Phil did cover this in a previous webinar. So I could perhaps share that as well, or you can find it on our YouTube page. It was just the vault continuing education one that was done about a month and a half ago. So it was actually fully done in that webinar too, if you'd like to see a visual demonstration of so. I think that did cover all the questions I have. We do still have a few minutes, so if you guys have any other questions you'd like to throw into the chat, feel free to. They don't have to specifically be on these topics. If you do have more general ones that we can cover, that's great too. So feel free to share those. I did have one question previously that I'm asking a little bit more info on. So Gabrielle had asked if we can review the steps to download the Xpubs, and I just wasn't quite sure what she meant in which regard and what hardware devices. So that is something that the site will walk you through, though, if you mean in pertaining to a key check specifically, it does actually walk you through those steps, Gabrielle.
Yeah,
but if you have...
It sounds like she might be referring to the wallet configuration file. So when you're on your Vault dashboard, this little 3-dot menu right above the transfer button is going to give you a lot of kind of additional features that you can use. So you always have to teach your COLDCARD about the Vault. So there's this COLDCARD configuration file that you can download, and then you would install it on your COLDCARD by going to Settings, Multisig, Upload, Import from SD. You also can download all of your wallet configuration details from this external spend info menu. So if you download this little JSON file, this JSON file contains all of the extended public keys for your particular vault. So you should download this file for each vault that you build or each loan that you build with us for use in the event that you need to external recover using Caravan. So again, this file, you can think of it as your treasure map or your directions to your particular set of multi-sig addresses, your wallet file.
Perfect. All right. Those are all the questions that I am seeing here. I'm checking my email just to make sure I didn't have any more come through that way as well. So again, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, it looks like we have covered them all.
All right. Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming this morning, this early afternoon for some of you. We'll very likely continue doing these continuing education webinars, both for Vault clients only, as well as for kind of a general audience if it's more of a general topic. So if you do have any feedback or any topics that you would like to see covered in a future webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Justine or anyone else on the Unchained team, and we can put together a future agenda.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Thanks, Phil, for doing that. It was a great demonstration. Great questions answered here. And yeah, like Phil said, if you guys have any questions or suggestions, feel free to reach out, and we will see you on the next Unchained Capital Continuing Education webinar. You guys enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Happy 4th of July.